Back, ladies and gentlemen. This is the special FF Metrics podcast. I'm your host, AndrewDFS. Joined alongside me is the founder and owner of FFmetrics.com, RC Fischer, the best scout, fantasy football projections in the game, handicapping advice. You want it, he's got it all. FFmetrics.com. Be sure to visit that website. We've got a really wide range of topics to discuss today. But before we do that, we really appreciate everybody subscribing to the channel, leaving a like or whatever, but please continue to do that. Hit that subscribe button, notify. You can also hit that bell by the, under the video to get notified every time we drop videos. Leave a comment, drop a like. We really appreciate all your guys' support. RC, how was your trip to Florida?
Frantic. Happy to be back at the home office, back at work, processing football. Whenever I go on the road, it's half work day, half enjoyment, and there's always trouble at the hotel or the wherever I'm staying. Doesn't have comfortable seating. Doesn't have the refrigerator that I like. There's always something. I'm like Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm on vacation, just constantly complaining about everything. So I am done with that. Got that behind me for another month till my next journey out into the world. So happy to be back, trying to catch up. I've kept up with all of the football news as best I could, to the angst of my family, wondering why I was always had my head buried in my phone. But I'm up to speed, processed on the combine, ready to talk about all of the things that have happened in the last week of interest.
Yeah, and really, there's no place like home. But speaking of the combine, RC, there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of college players that might have a new home this upcoming year. So the NFL Combine was last week, and there were definitely some big headlines to discuss, most notably Xavier Worthy setting a new record for the 40-yard dash. I think his official time was 4.21. Xavier Worthy was a receiver out of Texas, speedster. Is he going to be the next John Ross or maybe Deshaun Jackson? And then another big headline was, and we talked about it on our last podcast, Caleb Williams, quarterback from USC, the consensus projected number one overall pick. He skipped out on medical checks or whatever, which is, I think, the first time I've ever heard of a player really skipping out on that, or someone that highly touted not taking that. RC, in your opinion, who are the biggest winners and losers from this combine?
Well, let me backtrack to, so you talked about Xavier Worthy, talked about Caleb Williams. We'll hit on those real quick before we get into winners and losers. And my winners and losers are going to be maybe a little more jumbled up. There's winners, there's guys that won, like Xavier Worthy, that, yes, they won the combine in NFL and fandom terms, but I wouldn't call them winners for fantasy football. But so we have a couple players to talk about like that, but we'll start with Xavier Worthy. When I looked back at any players, but it's receivers that ran in the 4.2s that were under 180 pounds, and Xavier Worthy did it at 165 pounds. He's one of the smallest wide receivers of the group that ran in the 4.2s or maybe even low 4.3s. He's one of the smallest. The list, when you look at the list, it's not impressive. It's mostly guys that got a chance in the league, mostly as return men. The NFL didn't really know what to do with them, how to use them in the passing game, like a Jacoby Ford, or there were guys from years back. But then when you look at the more current era players in Worthy's size and speed, it's mostly guys that are going to go on to the NFL and get hurt. And even the one guy you can pluck off the list and go, see, Tank Dell, see, he's about Tank Dell size. That is true, and I love Tank Dell, but instantly injured his first year blocking. Uh, Barely looked like he got touched or had someone land on his leg. I forget how he did it, but he was blocking and tore his ACL. People will point to Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson was probably 15 pounds heavier running high speed. But we have a romantic thought of Deshaun Jackson. But he had a long career, but he only had like 2 good years, and the rest of his time he was hurt and or a problem. So the track record of 180-pound or less fast 4-2 wide receivers are more John Ross's and J.J. Nelson's than they are future stars. Tank Dell looked to be on his way to shattering that myth, but specifically to Worthy, yes, everybody's in love with him, but I had scouted him prior to the combine and then updated that scouting with the latest information. I just don't see a very good wide receiver, but he's fast. Things will happen. I'm sure he will have a long touchdown somewhere along the way, like John Ross did. But I think Xavier Worthy is a very overblown fantasy player, and what I'm excited about is he's drawing so much of attention. He's drawing so much attention for that 40 time, which is just one small part of the big picture of scouting, that he's going to end up going in the first round of dynasty rookie drafts, and I have no interest in him at all. So I'm happy. I consider him a winner because he's going to be taken by somebody else before I pick in the late first round or in the second round. So I think he's a sucker's play. He's becoming maybe the ultimate sucker's play in this dynasty rookie draft coming up.
So said differently, RC, he helped himself a lot. He probably cemented himself as a first round pick. And yeah, for our viewers, it's probably someone even though the media is going to probably pump him up over the few months, it's probably someone you want to avoid for not only dynasty drafts, but even redraft players that you have on your board. And one thing that I always found interesting, RC, I think Keyshawn Johnson made this point, like, football isn't played on a straight line without pads, right? Like, the kid is 165 pounds. If you throw pads on him, like, is he going to really run 4-2-1? Is he going to be able to beat man-to-man coverage? Like, he looks like a small guy. And I know Tank Dell looked great, but you almost have to protect those players too. The play where he got injured, I remember he was on the goal line run blocking. Like, why are you putting the kid inside? Just like let him live outside. Like, let him just exclusively play as a receiver. You got to protect those players too.
It's hard in this era to see those slender guys holding up long term, and that doesn't necessarily scare me off of them, but I don't want to pay first round money. I mean, Tank Dell was, I think, a third round pick. That's great. Give me, give me a couple of them. They're interchangeable. They don't cost as much. They get hurt, but the world's not coming to an end. But I'm not paying first round money. And Xavier Worthy is nothing close to Tank Dell. Tank Dell was highly, highly productive, growing in production every year in at Houston, where Worthy's was constantly coming down in production. I mean, for all that speed, I mean, that's great NFL speed. In college, that is warp speed. He should have destroyed college football like Tank Dell did, like Jalen Hyatt did last year, or his last year at Tennessee. Those super fast guys, they should tear it up in their final season when they have that kind of speed. And Xavier Worthy arguably had his worst production. It wasn't terrible, but he just never got any better from his freshman year. Scouting him on tape, flimsy hands. I mean, there's a lot to not like about Xavier Worthy. If he'd have ran a 4.37, a 4.42, I would have said he should be an undrafted free agent wide receiver. That's how bad of an impression I came off with after studying him. The 4.21 makes him a little more interesting, but for me, not that interesting.
Yeah, my wife's family actually has affiliations with the University of Tennessee. I think her grandpa used to teach there. So I watched that college football program more than any other team, even though I'm based in LA. And I remember Jalen Hyatt at RC. That kid could fly when he was in Knoxville. I mean, he's still doing it in the NFL. He just really hasn't had too many opportunities to have that like deep play because of the probably poor quarterback play.
I'd rather have a 4-3 running Jalen Hyatt, who's a couple inches taller, 20 pounds heavier, and run a 4-3 than wispy, cut a bunch of weight Xavier Worthy, who runs a 4-2-1. Even if the skill sets were the same, identical, I'd rather have the bigger guy in Jalen Hyatt, even though it's just quote unquote a 4-3.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears to the next topic, RC. The guy that everyone's pumping up, the 2022 Heisman winner, Caleb Williams, is thought to be the number one overall pick in this upcoming draft. He decided to skip all medical checks or whatever during the combine, which is one of the first times I've been hearing about this. Maybe it persists with other players and it didn't really make its rounds through the media. But he is willing to get like disclose those records or have specific team doctors check out his record, his like health or whatever. But it needs to be from, I think, like the top 5 teams that have a shot to get him. The part that gets me about this, RC, I get him not wanting all 32 teams to have his NFL record. I'm fine with that. But, and we might have made this point on the last podcast, the part that kind of bugs me is if I'm New Orleans at number 13 and I want to trade up for you and I don't have the medical records, how am I going to do it? Like, why are you limiting your market? Maybe it's also a way for him to control where he goes. I don't know. But I mean, theoretically, if I'm a QB coming out of college, I would rather have a team at the back end of the first, like how Kansas City did, trade up and come get me because you're probably a better team than anyone picking in the top 10.
Then I would, well, if I'm Caleb Williams, I don't care. I can't predict who's going to move up into the first round to get me. And if they want to show me that there's a deal, get us on a phone, get us on a 3-way phone call with Chicago and let me verify that this is about to happen, and I'll happily go out, and if it's a team I want to be with. If I'm Caleb Williams, I do exactly what he's doing. I wouldn't want a bunch of doctors poking and prodding. He's going to go number 1 most likely if he never does one medical check. Chicago having the number 1 pick should demand to a degree that he do a medical check. Then maybe that's the only one that he should do. Because if everybody's poking and prodding around, what if they find something? What if the Chicago doctors just kind of blow through it? And then what if you said the New Orleans Saints? What if the Saints go in and check and they come back and say he's got an irregular heartbeat or he's got a bad blood vessel to his heart and he's a risk of whatever, or they don't like something about the cartilage in his knee? It's going to hurt all of a sudden you're now hurting his draft value. So I wouldn't do any medical checks if I'm Caleb Williams, if I can get away with it, because only bad can come from it. Nothing good can come from it when you're in his position where he seems to be dictating whatever wants. I would dumb it down to say, if you were up for a major job with whoever, let's say Apple's going to hire you for, let's say Apple's going to hire me to do football, some football show. I would rather they not say, but we're going to do a medical check and a drug test. I believe I'm going to pass them. I don't have I've never had a drug of any kind. I can't remember the last time I drank any alcohol, and I barely have drank any in my entire life. I know that that drug test is coming back pristine, except for what if it doesn't? What if I had a poppy seed bagel? What if the test goes awry? Like, I don't want to even risk it. So I would rather get a job and not have to do any of that. I mean, how many times have you been, through the hiring process and they say, hey, we love you, you're hired, we just need you to run down and take a drug test. And you're going to pass it, but I'm kind of like, man, I
RC
hope they don't come up with something.
in California, marijuana, obviously is a legal thing now. Like you can easily get secondhand smoke. And the one thing I was afraid of, like back in my early days in my corporate career, there used to be one client that of ours that would require drug testing before he worked on any of their projects. And I was just scared, if I was going to lunch or something and someone was smoking pot on the street, the secondhand smoke could show up in your bloodstream. So that used to always freak me out. And Caleb is from USC. He's a college kid. He partied. I'm sure he's been around. If he hasn't done it, he's been around that stuff. I don't know if marijuana, like if players can smoke that now in the NFL. I don't know the rules, but I get what you're saying. It could just be incidental and cost him millions.
And then, so in that scenario, what if they wanted to do 5 drug tests before they hired you? You would be,
they'll find something.
If you didn't have anything to worry about, you wouldn't worry. But every time you took the test, you'd kind of like, man, I hope something crazy doesn't happen. I'm going to feel a lot better when I get the phone call that, everything checked out. I'm sure it's going to be fine. But so now we're talking about, I mean, Caleb Williams is set, whether he's the number 1 or the worst case scenario is the number 2 draft pick, millions and millions of dollars. If one of the doctors finds out that he's got whatever, sickle cell anemia, whatever it is they could find, it could cost them everything. So I would go, if I'm him or anybody, if I could get away with it, I'm not doing any more medical checks than I have to. And 0 is my start point, and then we'll go from there.
When I think about player stock falling like that, RC, because of drugs, the one player that always comes to my mind is Laramie Tunsil, who I think was like a projected top 5 pick at minimum. And then right before the draft, there was a picture of him that started surfacing on social media with him with like that gas mask, like weed thing or whatever. And that dropped him to 12. And Miami was able to take him. And that was a pretty big discount for a player of his caliber.
Yep, and it ended up being a disaster for most of the teams, and that skipped on him because he's turned out to be one of the best.
Yeah, and it worked out for Miami too, because even though they traded him, they got a lot of draft capital for him, and he's protecting Stroud's blind side now. So I think like both Houston and Miami are happy with where they are with him. But RC, who else stuck out to you in this combine? Like who would you say helped their value a lot, who decreased their value? And aside from that question, like who are you excited about? Like who impressed you? So I guess it's like kind of threefold there.
I'm intrigued by what Isaac Guerendo did from Louisville. He's going to be everybody's favorite fantasy football sleeper. Like they just discovered him. Nobody cared really about Guerendo. I thought he looked intriguing. When I did a preview of him ahead of the combine, I was like, wow, this guy can move pretty well. I would have never guessed he was 4.33. Like he can move pretty well, but he's not the greatest instinctual physical running back, despite the fact that he's a pretty big guy. Then you go and see that he's had 1,000,001 hamstring injuries and a Liz Frank injury. But the fact that he could come off a Liz Frank injury a couple of years ago, which used to just end careers, now 2 years later, he's running a 4.33 at 221 pounds. That is, when I went back and looked through my database of the running backs at 215 pounds plus, that run in the 4-3s. What Guerendo did, to me, should be the thing everybody's talking about, not what Xavier Worthy did. But Guerendo's going to be is interesting because he now comes a little bit out of nowhere to be in a discussion of what do you do with this guy. He really hasn't been a workhorse in college. He hasn't had the chance. He was behind Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin. Then he was behind Braylon Allen. Then he goes to Louisville and he's in a split and he does okay. And then all of a sudden he runs this speed at this size. And you're like, well, what do you, this is like a big Devon 8. Is this a big Devon Achane? Is this a big Keaton Mitchell opportunity? Like, should we be falling in love with this guy or should we have suspicions? So I put my scouting report out, and it's not always easy to answer the question of what the future holds for a guy like this or what the NFL should do with him, because he's a rare species. But if you look at the other rare species from the past, they all failed. But if you look at the rare species at running back that run this fast at this size, current era, the list is like, holy crap. It's Jonathan Taylor. It's Isaiah Pacheco. It's guys that were real impacts in the NFL in the 2020s. Prior to 2020s, these guys were always injured and kick returners and never wers. In the 2020s, these guys are some of the top running backs in the NFL. So I relate in my scouting report, I kind of related them to Bitcoin. Like, there's some people who will take a knife out and stab you if you're against Bitcoin, and they got all the reasons why it makes all the sense in the world. And as a former finance person, I can see it. All of the arguments for Bitcoin as a currency make all the sense in the world, except for I don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think the United States is ever going to let that be the currency of the country. So we've got a problem, but it's still perfect currency. And Guerendo is a perfect running back specimen at 221 pounds that can run a 4.33 sub 7.03 cone. And I think he had his vertical was like 41 and a half. I mean, it's stunning. Then you go, well, why did he stink at Wisconsin and was okay at Louisville? Like, what's the issue? He should be awesome. On paper, he should be awesome. On paper, Bitcoin should be our national currency. But it ain't, and it probably ain't ever going to be. But
RC,
you should probably own some Bitcoin.
Could this be another case, RC, where the guy throws on the pads and he might be like great in shorts and doing all these crazy athletic things, but he just doesn't have that football explosion?
I don't want to spoil the whole scouting report, but
ffmetrics.com, everybody. That's where you go find it. So check out RC's full report on that if you want more details. RC, give me a loser. Who?
Let me, and I'll just say,
go ahead.
There is a case. Some of these guys, you can look at the background like Guerendo and go, yeah, this is probably just speed guy that doesn't know how to play the position. There is that case. There's evidence for that to be true. But there's also evidence for the opposite that I think is intriguing, and I'll just leave it at that. We can get into the weeds on it if you read my scouting report on it. Sticking with the combine stuff, I'm just going to hit a couple real quick that I thought were of interest while I was on vacation. The JJ McCarthy train will not stop chugging, and I still do not. I'm not on board, but I get that in a draft. I think one of the things that's helping JJ McCarthy, besides Harbaugh making a statement and then everybody flocking to it, nobody likes the quarterbacks in this draft except for Caleb Williams, And there's a lot of dissension growing on Caleb Williams, but you're supposed to love him, so everybody just goes ahead with it. But I don't know that everybody's really in love with him. After that, I think they hate Drake May for the most part in general. There's not a lot of love for him. There's not a lot of love for Bo Nix. If you try to like Penix, somebody will smack you in the face with his double knee surgery issues. So there's not a lot to love in this draft as a pocket quarterback. Jaden Daniels is not everybody's cup of tea, just like Caleb Williams is not, because they're more scrambler type quarterbacks. Jaden Daniel being the better of the two. So I think everybody wants to love a quarterback. They're trying to find a quarterback to love. That's why there was a little bit of Spencer Rattler love for a minute, because they were trying to find somebody. But now I think all that's fallen on J.J. McCarthy. And I was watching his combine performance. It was fine. And he ran a really nice 3-cone. I was surprised by that. That doesn't mean you're a great quarterback because you ran a good 3-cone, but it helps. It helps bump up his grade or interest level. But I still don't see it. But I do see the fact that he is this month's favorite alternative to Caleb Williams quarterback. That's probably peaking too soon. The draft there is no science in the draft. There is a science to this draft, but the NFL does not deploy science in this draft. They are totally emotional about the draft and what they feel about these players. And the emotion at the moment is with J.J. McCarthy, but it might be with somebody else a month from now. There seems to be too much time. Rattler was the quarterback of February. McCarthy's going to be the quarterback of March. I don't know when we get to April if that's. I think we may have moved it. McCarthy may be old news right now. He still seems to be kind of fresh news. Brock Bowers measured in fine. I was wondering if he was going to be smaller than advertised, but he came in at a fine tight end size. You'd like him bigger, but I don't think it's going to matter. Everybody loves Bowers, and there's no real alternative to him. Rattler died at the combine, as he should have. His flame is going down. Braylon Allen not running a 40 time makes everybody worried that maybe he's not as fast as we thought he was going to be. And then he did not look great in the pass catching part of the drills. So the Braylon Allen stock is slipping a little bit. Then Keon Coleman just not running. Everybody's running 4.3s and 4.4s. So Keon Coleman comes in and runs a 4.6, and now everybody's going to hate him. For the same reason, everybody's going to love Xavier Worthy for one reason that you could poke a lot of holes in. Now they're going to hate Keon Coleman because he ran a time that wasn't pleasing, and they're going to ignore all of the other things that Coleman brings to the table. So those were the guys that I had most
RC, I want to stick
curiosity or interest in.
I want to stick with the receivers for a second because I feel like this draft class in particular has a lot of wide receiver talent, especially compared to last year. If you look at the top receivers taken last year, I think JSN was the number one overall. Then right after that was Quentin Johnston, which obviously wasn't the best pick in the world. But where would last year's top receivers stack up this year? Would JSN be a first round pick in 2024?
No, he shouldn't have been a first round pick last year. And that's the emotion of it. It's stunning to me that we have an industry called football and scouting and all these magazines and all these different people who scout for a living. And we get JSN as the number one wide receiver, or as a first round wide receiver. I don't know if he was the first. Was he the first one taken?
He was the first one.
Okay.
Let me double check, but I'm pretty sure he was.
But I mean, it wasn't far off if Zay actually went first. They weren't far off of each other. But if we redid the draft now, just last year's draft, I don't think JSN would be the top pick. But to compare classes, JSN wouldn't even be. He wouldn't be for sure in the top 5. I don't think he deserves to be in the top 10 of if he was in this current draft.
It was 4 in a row last year, RC. So it went JSN, Quentin Johnston, Flowers, and Addison, all back to back, like four consecutive picks at receiver. I think the only one from that list that actually like hit was Addison, and I guess Flowers too. I mean, Flowers showed flashes as well, but it's like where would you get, like, if you're looking, because JSN was, I know you didn't like him, but he was the consensus #1 receiver last year. Like, how low would he be on this list this year? Because like I could name off maybe 5 receivers right off the top of my head that I would definitely take over him. I'm thinking like the Brian Johnson, Malik Neighbors, those are the easy ones. But how low does JSN go in this scenario? Or is that is that kind of hard to say?
I don't think he would fall too far, because the same hysteria that he got last year, Marvin Harrison is getting, plus he has the name Marvin Harrison. So I think JSN would end up going top 5. He might be number 2 behind Marvin Harrison, just because everybody's in love with Ohio State wide receivers, and they've been good. They've been delivering lately, so I get it. But if we had JSN from last year, not knowing his what he was going to do in his first year in the NFL, which was be a big disappointment, I think he'd go number 2.
Or is he looking at the receivers that get taken with like the top overall picks, right? Like, let's talk about the first 5 picks in the draft. Like, in my mind, I'm thinking Calvin Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, Jamar Chase, right? Like, you have those guys in the back of your head, but then for every one of those, you have like a Justin Blackmon that didn't hit as well. Like, the hit rate for the first receiver, if you go back and look at the first receiver taken in the draft compared to the best receiver that came out, those answers are rarely the same. I think the only time it happened was maybe in the Fitzgerald, Johnson, and Jamar Chase drafts, where you're like, okay, the first receiver in this draft was the best receiver out of this class. RC, are we at risk of this again with Marvin Harrison Jr.? Like, because it just seems like there's so much wide receiver talent that any one of these guys like could really hit it off in the NFL.
If you could bet on them like stocks, if their actual performances were somehow put into an actual stock pricing, and we could trade them like stocks, you would rather own any of the non-first thing taken at a lot of positions than you would rather have that first thing taken. And it's getting worse every year. The value in this draft in the first round is the middle and late. The value in this draft is the second round over the first round. The value in this draft is day 2 over day 1. If I were an NFL GM, I believe I would trade, if I could. The general managers in the NFL are such wusses. They're so afraid to make a trade. There's more players on rosters in the NFL and then some than there are on a Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA. But those leagues are constantly trading everybody all the time. The NFL rarely ever makes a trade, and when it is, it's usually they're giving up something. They're just giving up on something and getting a draft pick. There is rarely to never a player at a certain position traded for another player at a certain other position because it's what they have excess and they have a need. So it's just like a perfect pairing. So they're going to swap this thing. That, I mean, there's probably not 5 in the last decade that were legit player for player. It's always in the draft picks are always the thing that is a driver of a lot of the trades. So all of these, I'm just stunned that with the advancements of technology and the testing and the GPS chips and the more readily available scouting tape and all of that, the industry of scouting football gets worse. The NFL can't make any more money if they tried, and yet the way that their teams are run and the way that they scout for talent gets worse every year.
Yeah.
So I would anybody who thinks, and I'm thankful for it for fantasy football purposes, anybody who thinks that Marvin Harrison is the far and away best wide receiver of this class, you're kidding yourself. I don't know how anybody could look at him and then look at the other guys and go, oh yeah, 99.9% of us have looked at everything as much as you have, RC. We looked at everybody, and we just happened to all agree, 99% of us, that Marvin Harrison is the best. I mean, there's so many good wide receivers. How could there be 99% agreement when you have all of this talent in this draft?
And for the viewers, just to clarify, RC, you're not saying that Marvin Harrison is going to be a bad receiver. You're just saying that and you might even have him ranked lower than Neighbors. That's not what you're trying to say. What you're saying is there's so much talent here this year. Like, I could even think of one at the end of the first round, Ladd McConkey. Let that guy land with the Chiefs and play that like Welker Edelman role, and God knows, like his ceiling's like unlimited.
And two things, I am very suspicious of Marvin Harrison as a good or great wide receiver in the NFL. I think he's more mediocre to good. So with so many good to great options, he's not in my top 5. I don't think he's a bust, but I think he's closer to bust than he is great. But I think he's fine. But there's so many flavors of ice cream. If you want a route runner, you got Ladd McConkey. If you want a faster Amon-Ra St. Brown, you got Roman Wilson. You want a big guy wide receiver, you got Keon Coleman. If you want to dabble with Johnny Wilson, if you want an all-around receiver, you got Malik Neighbors. You want somebody who's a unique basketball skill set, you got Brian Thomas. You can go on and on and on. And Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky kind of plays like Debo. There's so many. If Xavier Worthy, maybe he can turn out to be a tank down. I mean, you got so many different options, so many different flavors in this. I don't know how a very limited Marvin Harrison, who's just going to play on the outside, who doesn't have blazing speed, who has good hands, who knows what he's doing. I mean, he's competent. He's not a Quentin Johnston bust coming up that everybody could see, that everybody should have seen for miles coming. I just, of all the guys that I watch, and I'm like, my jaw hits the ground when I watch Ladd McConkey run his routes. When I watch Johnny Wilson get off the snap at his size, I'm like, that's unbelievable. He can't catch after that, but he can get off the snap incredibly well. Keon Coleman just looks like a dominant force. Brian Thomas is the best basketball playing type of wide receiver I've ever scouted. Roman Wilson is a total package, but he's smaller, so if you're looking for the slot role, that's Marvin Harrison just goes on the outside, is constantly covered, and has a couple nice highlight catches of him going over the top of coverage. But anytime I see that, I always think that guy's always covered. That's why he's making contested catches. If you're always covered in college football, what's it going to be when you're in the NFL?
Yeah.
I question how well Harrison can get free on his own, and he doesn't play a style like Malik Neighbors does, where he can run all of the right. He's going to play all over the field. Harrison seems very pigeonholed at his size of what he's going to do, and I just don't think he's that fast or that great of an athlete. But he's good. He's fine.
All really good points, and I want to issue an apology. I kept getting Brian Thomas's name wrong. I was saying Brian Johnson. It's Brian Thomas. He's my favorite receiver in the class, and I should get his name right. He's definitely going to be high up on my boards when I'm doing, dynasty drafts or whatnot, rookie drafts or whatnot. That guy, he just RC, like, he's so big and fat. I think he ran a 4.33. He already looked fast on tape. Like he lands in the right spot, it's gonna be crazy.
I'll watch tape on 100 wide receivers per draft class, and then I watch every NFL game live and then watch it back on tape during the week, scouting it, looking for clues and hints and what teams are doing with them. I get a lot of input into my visual memory banks on receivers. So when I do a new scouting year, I've seen it all. I'm a very Simon Cowell judgment of talent. Like, I can tell you if what I'm seeing looks acceptable, fine. Never going to be a star, but you can sing pretty well. You sing in your church choir. You can maybe sing in some local bars and venues and all of that. You're fine, but you're not special. Then you could tell the ones that just don't have it in their voice. There's rare few that back in the American Idol days, there was rare few that made Simon Cowell just stop in his tracks and go, holy crap. Same way for me when I'm scouting for the NFL draft, and then specifically about wide receivers. It's kind of one of those things where you know it when you see it, or impress me. I've seen it all. What do you get the guy that has everything for their birthday or for Christmas? Well, what do you give to the scout that's seen 1,500 wide receivers in the last decade doing work in college and the pros? Show me something. Get my attention. And Marvin Harrison just never has gotten my attention, but Brian Thomas has.
If you look at those top overall wide receiver picks, right, RC, you can start off by like the Justin Blackmon class where they do nothing, right? Then you have like Sammy Watkins, who has maybe 1,000-yard season. He's not great. Then you go to Amari Cooper, who can get going at times, but he's not elite. And then you have the elite class, right? Like, I think that it sounds like from what you're saying, he's probably going to land somewhere between the Watkins and Cooper groups of receivers. Maybe he's not going to be like no 1,000-yard seasons or anything, because he's going to get volume. He has NFL training like through his dad, and he's definitely going to just get chance after chance after chance just by his name. So he's probably going to land somewhere there, but I don't see elite in him.
It's kind of like Brennan Rice, Jerry. They've squeezed all of the talent. They got the top training. They got the top everything. So they're gonna be okay, because they didn't have to get a job in high school. They could just work with their personal trainer that was probably an ex-NFL player, if not their dad, like Marvin Harrison. They had the best training, the best everything. But Brian Thomas is just more naturally gifted than they are with half the work. And I want the naturally gifted who are also hard workers. Then I want the just naturally hardworking. Until we were just talking about it, never struck me that I don't know that there's a big difference between Brennan Rice and Marvin Harrison.
Wow. That is insane to think about. But RC, let's move before we get off the combine topic in particular. I want to leave you with one statement that I heard on a mainstream show, Colin Cowherd's show on FS1. He said over the next 10 years, I think him and his co-host Jason McIntyre were going back and forth. He said over the next 10 years, he'd rather have Oregon's QB Bo Nix over the 49ers QB Brock Purdy. RC, do you see anything in Bo Nix? Is that statement totally out of line?
There's something in Bo Nix. If that ended up coming true, I wouldn't be floored. But in my position at this very moment, what I've seen of Brock Purdy in the NFL, and then when I have to guess that Bo Nix is going to be, why wouldn't you take Brock Purdy? I mean, he's already a proven top 10 quarterback in this league. Now, I say that no one else thinks he's a top 10 quarterback. They all think he's a bottom 5 quarterback that's gotten super lucky, and Kyle Shanahan has made him, and we've already gone over that before. And it was just a couple months ago that they were trying to put Sam Darnold in over him, just like they were all trying to put Sean Mannion in over Jared Goff for the Lions back to his Rams days. I mean, Sean Mannion over Kirk Cousins a couple years ago. Then they've been trying to replace Jared Goff for years with Hendon Hooker, and everybody else is going to come and take away the terrible Jared Goff. They're just bad at what they do. So if they want to take Bo Nix over Brock Purdy, doesn't even faze me. But to Bo Nix specifically, he's not bad. I see that there's something in him. A lot of it's going to be landing spot. Like who were we talking about? Jackson Smith and Jigba. He lands on Seattle, so he's instantly going to be the third most targeted wide. He was already in a bad spot. I think he was an overrated wide receiver, but he goes to a terrible spot. So now a year later, we're like, that guy, shoulder shrug. Some of it is just where he landed. I don't think anybody'd give a rip about Tank Dell or Nico Collins if the Texans would have drafted Bryce Young. We wouldn't even be arguing like, you see how good Tank Dell is Xavier Worthy's just like him. You wouldn't even know who Tank Dell was if Bryce Young was the quarterback of the Houston Texans.
You wouldn't even know Nico, RC. That's the thing that drives me crazy. Everyone's talking about, Carolina didn't do this, didn't do that. I'll tell you what, if Carolina drafted CJ Stroud, Adam Thielen would all of a sudden be, look at this guy that just came out of nowhere. Jonathan Mingo might be a thing. DJ Chark might be a thing. The QB, I get that Carolina's offensive line was absolute garbage, but you know what else was garbage? Houston's was, you could say it was better, but it was still not great, right? But the rest of the NFC South was garbage too. Like Bryce Young had a bunch of easy games, and the guy crossed 300 yards, one time in the whole season?
CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow can make a bad offensive line look really good. Changes their PFF grades quickly. So it's not because the linemen got any better.
RC, I hope Houston does not make the same mistake that Cincy did, though. As good as Joe Burrow's been, Cincy has neglected that offensive line, and 2 out of 4 of Burrow's seasons have ended in season-ending injuries. The rest of the 2, if he plays fully healthy, 1, he ends up in the Super Bowl. 1, he gets to the AFC Championship game, and he should have made the Super Bowl that year, too. There were a bunch of weird calls in that game going to I don't want to even get into that. So Houston really needs to, they have a bunch of cap space. I know there's going to be a Saquon Barkley they're going to be interested in. They're probably going to say, hey, let's get another receiver here. Throw it all in the offensive line. You have your QB of the future. Just invest and protect your asset.
My fear for Houston is that DeMeco Ryans is going to go, great, we got all this money. Let's build this run game and defense the way that I want it. Instead of saying, look, we got to build everything around CJ Stroud. get pass blocking offensive linemen. Don't put money into your running backs. You don't need to. We got C.J. Stroud. Get a good secondary because we're going to be in a lot of shootouts or we're going to be up by 3 scores and the other team's going to be passing a lot. Let's get Cooper DeJean to play center field and as a safety and pick off a bunch of passes and run him back for a touchdown. Let's build around Stroud. I am so worried the Texans are going to build around the fake run game and defense like all defensive coordinators turn head coaches end up doing.
We'll see, RC. But speaking of terrible GM moves, and not to say Houston hasn't done anything bad yet, but I guess let's shift gears and go to.
They lucked into C.J. Stroud. We don't know how good Houston is.
That's true.
They lucked into it.
Do we know for sure that they would have? I don't remember. Were they going to take Bryce Young had they had number 1 overall?
If that could have happened, or maybe Carolina swerved and took C.J. Stroud, and then Houston would have took Bryce Young second, maybe. Like just not getting C.J. Stroud would have been a domino effect that we wouldn't even be really caring about what Houston's going to do with all of their money. If they would have passed on Levis and if they didn't get Anthony Richardson.
And you know what's funny, RC?
We would think totally different about Houston right now.
Not only that, but remember, they traded up for Will Anderson, too. So imagine they did Bryce Young, Will Anderson, then everyone would be talking about, oh, my God, Houston traded away their first-round pick this year. And if Bryce Young was on that team, I promise you that would have been a top 10 pick. Then they would start talking about, was that the worst trade? Did Houston just screw everything up? And now all of a sudden, D'Amico Ryans might be out of it, on a very hot seat. The GM will be on a hot seat. So that shows you, if you get your guy, you get your franchise QB, solves all problems. Now, they're playing with house money. They landed C.J. Stroud, and they have a ton of cap space. They better not screw this up. But speaking of bad GM decisions, RC, let's move to Denver, where there was some crazy news earlier this week when Russell Wilson was released. But before we do that, let's give the viewers some context, right? So back in 2020, John Elway loses his GM title. I don't know if it was voluntary or forced, but that he loses that title for the Broncos, and George Patton, I think from the Vikings, takes over the GM role in 2021. After the 2021 season, he fires Vic Fangio. They didn't do that great. I think they finished 7-9, but they didn't, or 7-10. I forgot if we moved to 17 games. They didn't look as bad as their record indicated. They had a pretty good D. But then Patton went on to make 2 of the biggest errors, I would think, of the last decade, where he not only gave a chance to a coach that wasn't ready in Nathaniel Hackett. Like, that guy is nowhere near NFL head coach material, but he also traded a bunch of first-round picks and players to the Seattle Seahawks for Russell Wilson. And before Russell Wilson even took a snap from the Broncos, RC, he was handed a 5-year, $245 million extension to on top of the contract that the Broncos inherited from Seattle. And before that contract extension could even kick in, RC, the Broncos released Russell Wilson, which left them with the most dead cap in NFL history. If you combine the 2 and 3 biggest dead cap hits, it doesn't even exceed what Russell Wilson left behind, which is $85 million. That can be spread out between 2 years almost evenly. So the Broncos have that on their books from the Russell Wilson contract. They gave up a bunch of picks, not only for Wilson, but they also had to trade a pick for Sean Payton. So, they're really playing behind the 8 ball here, RC, and they had to let go of Justin Simmons too because they're just in cap trouble. RC, my question to you, how does this guy still have an NFL? How is George Patton still an NFL GM?
It's when you lay out all of those details. If you'd have just said, "Hey, how's without giving any context and what we just generally know of Denver, if you'd have said, "Man, how's this Broncos GM keep his job?" and we'd chuckle and laugh and yeah, he's stupid and Russell Wilson, but when you really go through the detail notes like you did, the highlights, it is mystifying. Nathaniel Hackett is, I think, is probably the worst head coaching hire I have seen in my 15 years of doing this. The Urban Meyer would be a contender, would be the other contender. But when Nathaniel Hackett went so wrong, they pulled the plug in less than a year. When the Russell Wilson thing went so wrong, they pulled the plug after 2 years. They might have pulled it after one if it wasn't for the contractual sticky wicket that they were in. But then the GM has been just as bad and has been authoring all this, and they just keep sticking with them. Like, if there's anybody who should be taken out short of their contract, it should be the GM. But we see this, it makes me think of guys who are on the hook to become the next George Pattons of the league. Like, I think Ryan Poles is a terrible GM. And like we talked about a podcast or two ago, he should be known not for trading the Bryce Young pick. He should be known for not drafting CJ Stroud. And if he gets it wrong this year again, whether that's Caleb Williams or sticking by Justin Fields, he's almost in a no-win position. When it doesn't work, people should look at it as two terrible maneuvers, missing out, making the wrong quarterback decision, because what else are you there for if you can't get the quarterback situation right? The Cleveland Browns hierarchy, trading for Deshaun Watson and giving him that contract, should all be fired. I mean, those are colossal errors. You can make bad draft picks. You can draft a Quentin Johnston and it just not work, and go, man, what the heck? What were we thinking? That's a bad waste. Burning a first round pick and just burning it to nothing is bad enough. But when you have a situation like Deshaun Watson where you're trading several picks, you're giving him a contract like nobody's ever seen before. When it's a big giant bust, somebody needs to get fired. They're all still there in Cleveland.
That's wild to me, RC. And what's the craziest part of this whole deal with the Russell Wilson to me? The Broncos are going to pay him $39 million next year. And wherever he signs, right, that contract for this year is just going to offset the $39 million that the Broncos are paying him. So, for example, if he signs with the Raiders for the vet minimum, $1.2 million, then the Broncos have to pay him 39 minus 1.2, and the Raiders only pay him 1.2. So basically, Russell Wilson, for that first year of his contract, has no incentive to accept anything higher than the vet minimum because the Broncos are already on the hook, and he's not getting more than 39 million. So I just see a scenario where this is going to come back and haunt the Broncos, Russell Wilson, whether he signs with the Raiders or somebody else. Like, I could just totally envision him going into Denver, or Denver coming to wherever he's playing, and him defeating that team and embarrassing Sean Payton. But the one thing there, the biggest difference, I'm not trying to say the guy's elite or he's even playing at like a Pro Bowl level, but Russell Wilson at $1.2 million on your cap versus $40 million on your cap is two separate conversations.
And at the core of it, I have no earthly idea why he's going to play football this year. If he can't make any more money, if he's already locked in, if he's already got his $39 million, no matter what he does, he ain't making any more than $39 million. Why even bother playing? Take a year off if you want. What does Russell Wilson have to prove at this point? What
RC,
does he think he's going to prove?
his stock is so low though. So check this out. What if he lands somewhere where he can rehabilitate his value for 1 year? 1 year, right? Like, let's think about, I don't know, Atlanta, right? They have everything there. The offense is ready to go. Give the keys to Russell Wilson. You got a good O-line. You got weapons. Rehab his value for 1 year, and then he can get a contract the following year, right? Because right now he ain't getting a contract.
I guess. I mean, I don't think Russell Wilson has anything left in the tank. This feels like the Matt Ryan decline. I could see a desperate team that encounters an injury and there's a crisis like the Jets if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt again in July, and you're like, oh no, what do we everything is based on this year, we're all going to get fired. Then you roll out the red carpet for Russell Wilson. But other than that, who's making this guy their lead quarterback? Unless it is a drastic emergency. So, yeah. But we've already been talking about all these GMs that make all these dumb decisions. So, no doubt somebody will build their team around Russell Wilson.
I don't think
if I'm the Falcons, man, yeah. I would want my guy to grow with, or I'll spend the money on Kirk Cousins. I don't want a cheap Russell Wilson. Just like, on my vacation travels, I'm mystified by how horrible the coffee is in every hotel I go to. And there's a Starbucks within 2 or 3 miles of every place I go. And there's always a discussion between myself and my wife in the morning, like, let's just go to Starbucks and get a coffee. Well, they got coffee in the lobby. Yeah, but it sucks. Well, but it's already included in part of the room, and you go out and go get the Starbucks, going to cost you $6. And I'm like, yeah, but it's really good. I mean, what's the point of a free coffee if it's horrific? If we don't want coffee, that's one thing. If we don't value the Starbucks, but it's like, we're on vacation. When I'm at home, I got all my creation coffee material. I don't need to go to Starbucks because I make my own here. Doctor it all up, sugar it all up, do whatever I need to do to it. But when I'm on the road, like, I'm not stopping at Burger King for a coffee. I don't want the hotel coffee. We were staying at a Disney property. It was really nice. Kind of a golf. It's not one for the theme park, but one for like a golf, and they'd run a shuttle over to Disney if you wanted to do that. So, but it was a really nice property, and they had their own little coffee house hut on premise. So we're like, oh, that's a good idea. Well, let's go try it. Let's just go see. So we stood in line and got our coffee. It was arguably the worst coffee I've ever had in my entire life. So not only did I pay more because it was on a Disney property, I got total crap. So I don't want Russell Wilson. I don't want Russell Wilson brand coffee on purpose. I'll pay for Kirk Cousins. I'll pay whatever he wants. If Kirk Cousins winds up on the Falcons, they're going to win that division.
Easily. I mean, before Kirk Cousins got injured in last year, I think he was playing some of the best ball of his career.
Kirk Cousins, great.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, oh, well, yeah, Justin Jefferson. I was like, okay, all right, well, let's just see what happens when you put him with Kyle Pitts and Drake London. And, they could add 7,000 wide receivers through the draft to go with it. Plus, there's a bunch of nice receivers in free agency. There's already a base of a defense there. There's a great offensive line. The Falcons are built to win right now. If they get a big old cup of Russell Wilson, they deserve to lose again.
Oh man. Well, RC, let's talk about some of the transactions that have occurred in the NFL. I think we did a lot of talking about Russell Wilson and the combine, but there were some big time releases this week, and we'll start with the Buffalo Bills, RC. They cleared over $37 million in cap space through letting some players go, and they're still over the cap. So there's still some decisions that need to be made, whether it's restructures or letting more players go. One player in particular they could let go and get under the cap is Stephon Diggs, who's set to count $19 million against their cap this year. So they're either restructuring him or letting him go, in my opinion. So I'm going to list off the players, RC, that they had to release. And they're letting go of Jordan Poyer, Neal, Deontay Hardy, Mitch Morse, which was their center, Tre'Davious White, and they also traded a guard to the Chicago Bears earlier this week too, which, he was a durable guy. Like, he was starting games for him. So, I mean, those are like 6 players right there from the Sean McDermott, Josh Allen era that are all of a sudden gone because they didn't manage their cap well. RC, who's the most notable name on this list? Like, how much does this downgrade the Buffalo Bills in your eyes?
I don't think that it downgrades them at all, because if you look back at what Buffalo did just this past season, out of the gates, this was probably the best defense in the NFL. If it wasn't number 1, it was number 2. Just from the looks standpoint, what it looked like to me as I was watching every game and keeping track, doing it all for fantasy. I was watching the Buffalo defense and going, holy crap. Then what brought them down around week 4, it started with Tre'Davious White tearing, I think it was ACL, or I don't know if it was Achilles or ACL that it did him in. He had an ACL the year prior. He came back from that. Then he had a non-contact injury late in a blowout game. That is when they were blowing out Miami. He got hurt and gone for the season again. So when he went down, they were definitely weakened. But it was that next game, and I forget who it was that they were playing. It's like every defensive player they had was being carted off. If you remember that game.
Yeah, I think that was against Miami, RC. I remember
it started with Miami, and I think it carried into the next week. It was like more and more players were getting carted off the field. They couldn't even get the game hardly going because every other play, legitimately, the cart was coming out to take another Buffalo Bill off the defense, off the field. So they got whacked with injuries. They started losing games. They fell behind the Dolphins. There was a question, is Buffalo even going to make the playoffs? Mid-season. Then they finished with a flurry. The defense started to get better. Some of the guys started getting healthy, but some of the young guys started to step up. Then they made that great trade for Rasul Douglas. And then all of a sudden, Buffalo is back to being a good defense again, a top defense. It was starting to peak late. I think Sean McDermott was looking at all of that and going, we already had our defense, our defensive roster jumbled up last year, and we came through it fine. I don't need these guys because they're always all getting hurt. So, and they're expensive. So why go through this? I can rebuild. We got Rasul Douglas. We stole him from Green Bay. One of the dumbest trades. When Green Bay then ends up going on to the playoffs, Rasul Douglas might have been the difference in them getting past San Francisco. But I think Buffalo's looking at it like, we can save a lot of money. Sean McDermott is a good defensive coach. He'll take the next handful of players from free agency and the draft, and he'll build another good defense on the spot. He did it mid-season. One of the better coaching jobs scenarios of 2023 was what Sean McDermott did with his defense when he lost half of it around week 5 of the season.
And when he fired his OC, because that's when that offense started clicking.
And when he fired his OC and letting Leslie Frazier go before the season started, or him, or Leslie Frazier quitting, whatever it was, all of a sudden that was the best Buffalo defense I'd seen in a while. It was when they got rid of Leslie Frazier, when Sean McDermott took back over the defense, and the first couple weeks out of the gates when they were all healthy. Then it all fell apart. Then it all started to come back late. So I think what Buffalo is doing is pretty brilliant. I'm sure they would like to have Poyer back, but I'm sure they would like to have Poyer back to his old ways 5 years ago at the price 5 years ago. They had to make the hard decision now. The Nyheim Hines deal was terrible. I mean, for everything good that McDermott does on defense, he then does something equally horrible on offense. So the Nyheim Hines deal was stupid. Deontay Hardy, they never used them. They're letting Gabe Davis is walking in free agency. Mm-hmm. Mitch Morrison's good, but I think he's just too hurt and for the cost. So the Von Miller deal was ridiculous. I think they're just trying to do what most teams, at least they're going through making the hard decisions and gutting things that maybe looks like a little bit of a panic or recognizable names, but I think they realize it's time. They're not doing this in anger and just cutting everybody. This is not a new coach and new regime coming in and gutting the old regime. This is them going, we gotta do some renovations on this house.
Well, RC, March 13th, I think 4 p.m. Eastern is the start of the new league year. I don't know if I got the time right. All the teams need to be under the cap. So, I mean, Buffalo's getting there. They're over it, but they can make one more. Again, if they restructure Diggs or release him, that could be another move. I'm not advocating for that because that's their top receiver, but that is one way they can get over it. But that's an interesting take because I think the consensus in the mainstream is that, Buffalo's taking a step back, and obviously they rather have some of those players than release them, but you don't see that as moving the needle for them. And it's going to be exciting to see James Cook, Dalton Kincaid coming back, their younger pieces. And if they add one more receiver in the draft, which is, this one has a lot of great receivers, it could be interesting.
There's a path for any team, not just Buffalo, to get in on like a Curtis Samuel, get a professional veteran wide receiver that still has juice, that's not in his, 32, 33 years old type of veteran, that's still kind of in their prime, that's undervalued, then add one of these great rookies in the first couple of rounds, and then all of a sudden you've got Diggs, you've got a grade young wide receiver from the draft, and you've got a professional like Curtis Samuel, and you've totally redone your wide receiver group, and it wouldn't cost you much money in free agency, and it wouldn't cost you a first-round draft pick. You can use your first-round draft picks on shoring up the defense, shoring up the offensive line, or in their case, they need to get a cornerback in there as well. So everything looks right as long as they don't turn around and botch it with it's great that they're freeing up all this money, but what if they blow it all in bad free agency moves or draft the wrong players?
I think you could easily say that Buffalo gave the most stress to Kansas City last year in the playoffs. I mean, they were, there was that missed field goal late. Allen missed Gabe Davis in the end zone too, or Khalil Shakir. I forgot who, but that was a receiver wide open that he missed. So, I mean, they were right there with Kansas City in the divisional
Tyler Bass
round.
doesn't push that field goal, or God doesn't take a big inhale and exhale it right at the time Tyler Bass kicks that field goal right down the middle, and then all of a sudden it moved right like one of my tee shots in golf. Then we might be talking about Buffalo made it to the Super Bowl. I thought Buffalo was going to be the AFC representative in the Super Bowl.
They were the very popular
The way they
non-Baltimore
closed,
pick.
yeah, the way they had closed, it was probably the two best teams, the best teams closing at the end of the year with Buffalo and the Rams.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, if Rams got paired up with the 49ers RC in either one of those games, like the Packers one or Lions, I think they would have won it. Because the 49ers did not bring the best version of themselves in both those games. So RC, other news around the league. Over $100 million of safety money was cut from various NFL teams. We already talked about Jordan Poyer, but Justin Simmons from the Broncos, Kevin Byard from the Eagles, Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs from the Seattle Seahawks. RC, a lot of teams cut in safeties. I know you've talked about this in the past, that how that's a position that maybe you don't think a ton of value should be put on, maybe unless they're Ed Reed or something, which I don't think that any of these, or Troy Polamalu, I don't know that any modern day safeties even close to those guys today. But what are your thoughts on all those all those safeties getting cut?
And Anton Winfield is really good, but I don't know that I could bring myself to pay him because I just don't think between what the safety position means in the grand scheme of things, to me, it's not. It's at the bottom of importance versus um, quarterback, offensive line, and cornerback as the three biggest things. Safety is one of the bottom three things to deal with. So why would you invest a lot of money in it? Why would you waste a first round draft pick on it? Why would you give a big contract out on it when there's plenty of supply? I mean, it's one thing to say it's not that important of a position, but okay, it is a position, so I want a really good player out there. There's plenty of good players that are going to be available, as now witnessed by all of these guys getting dumped back into the pool, plus the incoming safeties. And this is going to be an NFL issue for the next couple of years. Is the talent coming in from college is so much better than it used to be, and it's coming in droves, kind of like the wide receiver group. It's like you can fall in love with Lad McConkey, and you can fall in love with Brian Thomas, and you can fall in love with whoever, Marvin Harrison Jr. But where are they landing? If they land, there's going to be more and more of these guys are going to be landing like Jackson Smith and Jigba, where you're instantly the third best wide receiver on your own team. Used to be the top wide receivers would join their new team and they'd be the best because the rest of the wide receiver group was terrible, because there was about a handful of wide receivers that were worth a rip in the NFL. Now every team's got two number ones, it seems. Some of them are working towards three number one wide receivers. Where are all these guys going to go and get targets over the existing guys that are already established, experienced, and just as talented? You bring in two more classes of wide receivers like the wide receiver class we have right now. I mean, every team's going to have three number one wide receivers. So now we've got all of these safeties, corners that started to slow down and move to safety are safeties. Safeties who were great in the past are available. Then you got a new influx of a lot of young talented guys. There's just so many safeties out there. Why would anybody spend any money on the safety position? So I'm glad to see it from a personal standpoint, because I've never liked teams doing the Jamal Adams drafting and huge contract. To me, were two of the stupidest things that have happened in the NFL in the last 10 years. So I'm now willing into existence that edge rushers is going to be the next thing to fall. I am on a personal vendetta against the edge rushers, that there's too many of them. They don't make an impact anywhere near what everybody thinks. I'd rather put my money into defensive tackles than I would defensive ends. I would rather put my money into cornerbacks before I would put it into pass rushers. You can make a lot of guys pass rushers all of the top sack guys either didn't make the playoffs, or the couple that did get into the playoffs lost. Myles Garrett is nothing. Micah Parsons gave you nothing. I mean, the Cowboys won a playoff game in the Micah Parsons era. Did they win one the year prior?
They beat Tampa last
Bay.
year. Yeah.
So they beat a losing record division winner, Tampa Bay, if I remember correctly. They had
Brady was checked out. I mean,
so that's their big claim to fame. And then getting embarrassed by Green Bay, with Quick named Green Bay's top pass rusher. That tells you how important it was, so how important Micah Parsons was. So I'm hoping that edge rushers are going to be the next to fall. Wide receivers and quarterbacks are going to start to fall here soon.
In my opinion, RC, I think the influx of wide receiver talent, we're going to see that be a bigger headline than edge rushers, because they're so they're faces of the NFL, right? And we're going to get into this, but already we saw Mike Evans. I was actually really shocked at the deal he took. He didn't get as much as I thought he would. So I think it's already starting to happen, but we'll get into that. He is an older receiver. Let's continue on with the cuts that were made. Miami also started to, pick and choose some players. They let go of Emmanuel Ogbah, Xavier Howard, who was kind of injured last year and starting to fall off. I feel like corners, RC, they have a pretty low shelf life in the NFL. They start off prominent, really strong, but then they feel like they have a similar elite shelf life to running backs, maybe a little bit more. And then lastly, they also released linebacker Jerome Baker, and they're also letting Christian Wilkins hit the free agency market, which was their best, that's their defensive tackle. And he's young, so I mean, I'm sure he's gonna have plenty of suitors in the market. RC, do you think Miami or Buffalo is losing more right now?
Miami is losing more because I still think Xavier Howard has fuel in the tank. It's just he's gonna want a ton of money, and I'm sure it was a business decision. Financially, you can't keep everybody. They're not going to miss Ogbah. They're not going to miss Jerome Baker. They're going to miss Xavier Howard, and they're going to miss Christian Wilkins, but I don't know that I would pay Christian Wilkins the money that he's going to be asking for. Xavier Howard would be the one. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami brought back Xavier Howard, but the talent that I see between Wilkins and Howard, those are two guys that are more at the top of their game than anybody that Buffalo cut. So this is more potentially Vic Fangio fallout problems. Wherever Vic Fangio has been lately has gone into a death spiral between Denver and now Miami.
And now he's with the Eagles, who they're
kind of on the Eagles, which were already. I mean, you can't get any worse than the Eagles' defense last year. So,
RC, this is getting away from our theme of cuts. There was a trade that was just made. I don't know if you caught wind of it.
Mm-mm.
The Browns got Jerry Jeudy from the Broncos, and they gave up a 5th and a 6th round pick in this year's NFL draft. How do you feel about the Browns receiving core now? They got Cooper, Jeudy, and Elijah Moore. I know you're not the biggest Jeudy guy, but probably better.
Not the biggest Jeudy guy. He's terrible. I am so delighted that all Jerry Jeudy yields is a 5th and 6th round pick. He's not even. He barely made. We debuted the Dynasty top 600 players valuation. He was barely inside the top 100 wide receivers. You'll see some wide receiver names potentially that you'll have to stop and think, I don't even know that these guys are in the league, that I have as Dynasty ahead of Jerry Jeudy. This is a vindication for RC moment, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer team, because I can't stand the Cleveland Browns because of the way that they are run. I don't have anything against Cleveland or anything else. I think the owner is a nightmare. I think then on down, the general manager making that Deshaun Watson trade is arguably the worst single move in my history of being involved with football analysis. So the fact that they are going to add Jerry Jeudy is just music to my ears. And it makes so much sense that such a terrible wide receiver would go to a organization who is terrible. You just made my day.
RC, if
And
I'm teeing you up,
and everybody would have seen Jerry Jeudy as the best wide receiver in his draft class. And now look, I'm just saying, when I say I have hesitations with Marvin Harrison Jr., don't bet against me, public. Or please do bet against me. There will be betting I will be doing, legitimate, real betting I'll be doing. I need people on the other side of this so I can take their money.
What just happened, for those of you that like golf, is I was teeing up RC. I just put the golf ball right there, and RC got his flat iron and just freaking smacked the crap out of the ball before my hands were even off the ball. So I knew that was gonna get him going there. But yeah, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, RC, you've said it from day one, and I don't remember that draft class of receivers. I feel like there were other good players. Like, was that Justin Jefferson's draft class with Jeudy, Ruggs? Is that the same one? Or
I know Ruggs was in that. I think Jalen Reagor and Jefferson were a part of that.
Oh, Ayuk
as well, and Brandon Ayuk.
Man, that's wild to think that all. And it's funny too, because I think it went.
And Jeudy went first.
Was it no Ruggs? Didn't Ruggs go first? And everyone's like, "What?"
I thought Jeudy went right before Ruggs. Now you're gonna make us have to look this up.
We gotta figure that out.
Jeudy, what a laugh.
But I think whatever it was, it went either Ruggs or Jeudy 1-2, and then CeeDee Lamb, then Reagor, Jefferson. But like there were 6 receivers taken there, and 3 of them were decent, like Ayuk, Jefferson, Lamb hit, and then the other 3 were just terrible.
Wow, you're right. I can't believe that's such a blast from the past that Henry Ruggs was the top wide receiver taken in that draft.
Mike Mayock, I live in LA, so it's like there are a lot of Raiders fans here. So when something stupid happens, it kind of sticks to my head.
Mike Mayock in that draft.
RC, talk about
did he also take Cleveland Farrell? Was it that draft or the next draft?
I'm not 100%.
So
sure.
I mean, Mike Mayock drafted the year that they assembled all of those first round picks. They spent it on a running back, a safety, and Cleveland Farrell, and then I think the next year with their top pick they got Henry Ruggs. What a complete and utter disaster. And then traded for Antonio Brown.
What about Leatherwood, RC? He was a part of that pick of first-round picks from them, too. It's crazy because they got all those picks from trading Khalil Mack, and they did nothing with it.
This was your highest-paid top guy on NFL Network to break down the Combine, the Senior Bowl, and the NFL Draft. Gets his chance to show his wares in the NFL and ruined it for me to ever be hired out of anonymity to run an NFL team. Mike Mayock blew it for all of us. After Ruggs, Jeudy, Lamb, Reagor, Jefferson, Ayuk, in the second round, you could have gotten T. Higgins, who I didn't like from that draft, Michael Pittman, who I loved, Chase Claypool, who I've loved that I've learned to now not love ever again or anyone like him. One of my favorites, Darnell Mooney in the 5th round, was available. Isaiah Hodgins, 6th-round pick, who I think is the comp for Marvin Harrison Jr.
Oh, God.
And Super Bowl hero Jawan Jennings, 7th round.
UT guy. That's another University of Tennessee guy. RC, I mean, if you were the GM of the Raiders, I think you would have put them in a way better position than what Mayock did. He just totally, him and Gruden, they had all of this draft capital, and it's just create like the only pick that you can say hit was probably Josh Jacobs. But like you hit on a
But you
running
shouldn't
back.
have spent. Yeah, you shouldn't have spent first round money on a running back. I will. I need to shut up because as I look through this draft, I would have been backing Pittman, Claypool, and Bryan Edwards. So I might get fired right along with Mike Mayock. So I'm not going to say anything.
RC, it depends where you take them, right? You're not going to take those guys with your first round. So I mean, you could you can miss on a third round, fourth round pick, and Pittman ended up being decent. But let's move on to the big signings, RC. We're going to get a lot more. In the I think free agency kicks off or tampering period kicks off sometime next week. But what already happened was Baltimore Ravens giving their big-time defensive lineman Justin Madubuike a 4-year contract, $98 million, RC. 53.5 is fully guaranteed this year. So he's paid that up front. And if he's on the roster next year, RC, he gets another $22 million guaranteed. So really, if he stays on the roster for 2 years, this deal is close to, I'm doing math in my head, $74.5 million guaranteed for Madubuike. He deserves it. RC, what did you think of this one?
That's when you've got a player that shows that he's near or at the top of his position group, you're going to have to pay him. That's what as much as I don't like safeties, Antoine Winfield would make me have to stop and think, do I really have the guts to just let him go? With Madubuike, he was fine before this, and then all of a sudden had his breakout, and this is just what you're going to have to pay when somebody has that kind of growth and performance. Of all the sack guys, the top 10 players in sacks last year, he was the only one in the top 10 that was not an edge rusher. That was a defensive tackle. Going off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got that kind of player.
Got to pay him.
You got to pay him.
That's what you were just saying. That's where you want to invest your money in not even edge rushers, D linemen like Madubuike.
I don't want to invest that kind of money at defensive tackle, but I had a hard time saying no. I mean, I'd only want to pay Aaron Donald ever. Everybody else is negotiable or, to me, replaceable with cheaper models.
Or maybe
at defensive tackle, but if you're going to pay somebody, he's one of the ones you're going to have to pay.
And then RC, another big contract that hit the market, Jalen Johnson for the Chicago Bears, who they have plenty of cap space. And say what you want about polls, but I think they got a pretty good deal in this one. So check out the terms here. 4 years, $76 million, $54 million fully guaranteed, right? But it's a front-loaded contract. The back end of it, he's only getting $16 million per year. So really, that brings down the average annual value from $22 million. From $22 million in the first 2 years to $19 million overall. Like that seems like a pretty good deal for a decent cornerback.
There's two what the hell moments that probably happened when these deals got announced, all at the same time. Jalen Johnson should have been calling his agent going, what the hell? Did you just see what a defensive tackle just got compared to what I just got at a more important position? Cornerback would have been my first, and my second would have been.
And we have cap space. The Bears have cap. Like Baltimore is like, they're playing Lamar Jackson. They're not paying a QB. So like the defense, everybody else should get a lot more money.
If I'm the Ravens owner, I am calling my general manager and going, what the hell are you doing paying a defensive tackle that much money? Look at what the Bears just paid Jalen Johnson, who's exponentially more valuable as a shutdown corner than a really good defensive tackle. What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
If I only had choice of one of these two guys, if the contract terms were identical, I would rather have Jalen Johnson.
And by the way, if L'Jarius Sneed would agree to a deal like that, I think Kansas City would sign him tomorrow. Right?
Yeah.
right? Like that's a very reasonable
Yeah,
deal.
Legarius Sneed will be the third. What the hell? It's going to be like calling Jalen Johnson and going, "What the hell did you just do? You just ruined the marketplace for shutdown corners."
Apparently, he can be had for as low as a second-round pick. I guess that's how high his contract demands are. It doesn't seem like people are going to be willing to meet it, but he is an excellent player, young, and we'll see where he goes. But RC, here's one that really surprised me. Tampa Bay receiver Mike Evans, who I think has had 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I thought if this guy hit the open market, there would be a team that would just give him a 4-year deal, at least 25 million per. But he decided to stay in Tampa, and I thought that's what he would do. But I would think that the Buccaneers would have, kind of given him a thank you sort of contract where he's stuck with them all this time, won with Super Bowl with them, but he got 2 years, $52 million, $35 million fully guaranteed. Okay. So already that in itself, the average annual value, 26 million for over 2 years. Like I thought that was weird because this is probably his last contract. I don't think anyone's going to give a 32-year-old a 4-year deal. But then on top of it, what we find out later is this isn't actually a 2-year, $52 million deal. 11 million of that 52 are contract escalators. So there are milestones he needs to hit. I don't know how hard they are for him to hit, but there are milestones he needs to hit for him to unlock $11 million. So really, this is a 2-year, $41 million contract. RC, that brings him down to just over $20 million a year, which I think is a great deal. That's a very team-friendly deal right there for a team that, they made it to the divisional round, but he's not taking a cut for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I thought that was very strange.
We're still in an era where not only do dynasty general managers hyperventilate over the ages of players, the NFL general managers and just fans in general are constantly worried about age. So old, quote unquote, wide receivers just aren't getting paid. I think that the DeAndre Hopkins situation last year was somewhat of the forerunner of what Mike Evans was going to be in for. DeAndre Hopkins got cut. He was free to go wherever to make all the money he could, and there wasn't a ton of teams there was a bunch of teams that met with him, but nobody was ever giving him a contract offer, or at least one that he thought was worthwhile. And then I think he ended up with the Tennessee deal was like 2 years, 35 or 40 million. So Evans is in that roughly that same range. And I think Hopkins is guaranteed might have been around 20 something million.
Looking up Hopkins now, I thought it was a 1-year deal. Is it 2?
I thought it was 2.
Oh, it's 2. You're right. It is 2.
Whether they're going to act on it or keep him could be debated. But what was the guaranteed? 20 something?
No, that was the full value. 2 year, 26 mil. Oh no, sorry. Hold on. Let me actually click into this. Yeah, the computers are going way too slow when we're podcasting, but I don't know.
If you're looking it up on Spot Rack, I think it's Spot Rack. It might be an issue.
That's where I'm looking at it. It looks like my Spot Rack's going. It looks like it's at $11 million in guarantees, RC, but they added a lot of void years to that contract too.
Yeah, it's a Spot Rack issue. It's not your computer because I'm going through the same problem. 2 years, 26 million, $10 million signing bonus, plus another 11 guarantees. So 20 million guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean I'd keep him at that rate.
So Mike Evans got a better than that deal,
which is
deserved. About the same age, and he was about the same age as Hopkins, so it makes sense. He might have been able to squeeze some more as a pure free agent, but there's a lot of fear over any time a receiver hits 30 years old. So,
and plus he gets to stay in Florida where there's no tax. He doesn't have to move. So yeah,
and he'll be the number one. They'll bring back Baker. Evans will be the number one. If Evans went somewhere else, I don't know that he'd be the number one. And he wouldn't be. He might have to go to the Northeast. Might have to go to the Patriots or Washington or something. And who the hell wants to play there? So just stay in Tampa Bay and get all the targets. Drop too many of them, but catch a lot of them and be fine.
Had to throw a little salt at him, Marcy. Okay, let me round up the last big signing. Kevin Dotson, guard with the Rams. Seems like the Rams are doing a really nice it felt like this was going to be their tank year. There were even talks in the offseason of them moving off Stafford, but then all of a sudden they have new life with Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, and now they re-signed their guard, Kevin Dotson, 3 years, $48 million, 32 of which is fully guaranteed. I like what the Rams are doing, RC. Like this is like a total let's renovate the house, but let's not tear down the foundation sort of rebuild. So I mean, they made noise, and they had a shot at making even more noise in the postseason if they got through the Lions in the playoffs.
Arguably the best offensive line of last season. They're shoring it up, or keeping it intact. This is what you want to spend your money on, and they are. I want to see what the Rams do for their backup quarterback, away from saying that the Rams are my NFC representative for the Super Bowl this season.
Okay. I like it, RC.
My one fear is that Stafford is so able to go down with all the injuries he's had and the ages he's hitting. And there's plenty of good quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks, fringe starter quarterbacks that they can make as a backup. And I would feel a lot better. Carson Wentz is not going to step in and take them to the Super Bowl. And Stetson Bennett is not going to either.
Oh, no. He might not even be on the team.
I need them to shock the world and draft Michael Penix or sign. I don't think there's a legit backup quarterback. I don't think there's a quarterback that
maybe
can just jump in. Yeah, Minshew maybe is about as far as I would stretch it.
RC, I think that's probably what they're gonna do in the draft, though. You have to think that with Stafford's age, that they're gonna go grab a Penix or even a Bo Nix and start developing them. And yeah, we'll see. I think that they have you can see their young core starting to emerge. But let's shift gears to free agency, which is gonna kick off in the latter part of next week. Christian Wilkins hit in the market. Chris Jones, we thought that he had a deal in place. He's probably going to hit the market too. And Kirk Cousins as well, he can't get a deal done with the Vikings. I think those are three of the biggest names in free agency hitting the market. RC, is there anybody you're excited about free agent wise? Like, who would you say is your best one who's fool's gold?
We're going through a series now where I look at who the consensus top three free agents are at each position, but then who are my top three. And that's my top three is a mix of the best players, but also their value that they're going to go off at. And then we look at the frauds and the sleepers and the value picks among the free agents. If I were an NFL GM, I would be – as I go by position, there are too many good players that are going to go for bottom basement bargain prices that I don't have to chase Christian Wilkins. I acknowledge Christian Wilkins is a really good player, but I don't have to pay some he's going to want the contract that Madubuike just got from Baltimore means you can't afford Christian. I don't want to pay Christian Wilkins that much. I don't want to pay any defensive tackle that. I don't want to pay Chris Jones that much money. So,
they're all going to point to that deal and
oh
say
yeah,
that's the baseline.
that's.
So
I
if you
mean,
want me, it needs to be more than
he
that.
ruined anybody who thought, hey, we'll get Christian Wilkins. And I know half the league, because most of the coaches are ex-defensive coordinators. They're going to want Christian Wilkins with everything they got. They're going to want Chris Jones even more. They have to be loving Matabuke. They didn't make a what the hell call. They were sending a fruit basket over to Matabuke's agent for doing this for them. I wouldn't want Wilkins for that money. I wouldn't want Chris Jones for whatever version of short-term version of that. Um, you can keep all the pass rushers, Danielle Hunter and all that. And Danielle Hunter is a great pass rusher. I'm not putting money into a pass rusher. I'll take all that money. You tell me I would go to Kirk Cousins if I'm like the Atlanta Falcons or the Patriots. I mean, he's not going to go play for Washington or the Patriots, because only a fool would go play up in the Northeast when they have plenty of other options to go play elsewhere. If you're a quarterback, you don't want to play in the Northeast with a bad team in a bad geography that's going to have a hard time attracting free agents and everything else. So if I'm Kirk Cousins and I've got all the money in the world and all the options in the world, I'm going to Atlanta, or I'll stick with Minnesota this particular year. And if I'm Atlanta, or if I'm Tampa Bay, I will go to Kirk Cousins and go out and find the best offer that anybody's going to give you. Have them submit it. Have them, and then you tell, when Minnesota makes a year off. If I'll just say Atlanta, because I think that's where he's going to go. If I'm the Atlanta owner and GM, I'm like, let Minnesota submit their offer. Let Tampa Bay submit their offer. We'll bring them into it. Let Las Vegas submit their offer. Then once they do that, go ahead and tell them all who won, and that they can submit a second offer if they want to try to beat the current number one offer. So then let all the offers come back in. Whatever the highest offer you can get on paper, I will increase every number by 10% and sign you. Like, go find out what you can get. Just know, whatever it is, I'll bump it by 10% if you'll sign it right away, right when you're done. You can't go take it and try to get a third round of offers. Just go do whatever you got to do to get your best offers, and I'll beat it by 10%.
And if you don't,
that's how important Kirk Cousins is in this. It's Kirk Cousins, and then no one else matters in this free agent class, because they're all lesser important and replaceable, and there's bargains, but you can't find a Kirk Cousins replacement in, from the number 6 free agent on down. But there are some defensive tackles I could look at that I could get interested in that are going to come in for 20% of the price of these guys, and I could just be as happy with as a Wilkins or a Jones. But if I don't have quarterback, it don't matter what I got at defensive tackle.
And put yourself in the Atlanta GM shoes, right? So it's been 3 years, 7-10. Was it really Arthur Smith? Was it really him? I mean, Terry Fontenot's probably on a hot seat as well. What better way? Like, this is a move that they're gonna make. They're gonna go for a veteran guy, in my opinion. I mean, they might still draft somebody with the 2nd-round pick or 3rd-round pick, but I don't see how they don't do exactly what RC said and just give cut. And they have the cap space to do it.
My version of letting Kirk Cousins' agent and team go find the best deal possible, and then letting them go through round 2 and round 3, just squeeze them all for whatever they want, and just know that I'm going to beat it by 10%, sight unseen, until I see the offer. My version, if I'm the Falcons GM, is going to be, you do that. You go find all of that, then let us know what it is, and I'm going to pay you 10% more. But first, I'm going to place one phone call to the Tennessee Titans and say, what do you want for Will Levis? And if I can trade for Will Levis, that will be my move. And if they say, get the hell out of here, then I'm like, Kirk Cousins, 10% more than your best offer. Come on down. It's like hey, Brock Purdy, you're a starter unless Tom Brady wants to play here. I would say, Kirk Cousins, you're my guy unless I can get Will Levis for a second-round draft pick or a first-round draft pick or whatever I need to do.
Tennessee would be crazy, like just thinking about it, right? Like, how would they not listen? Just public perception. So we're thinking that Tennessee doesn't view him in the same light as you do. How would they turn down a first round pick for Levis? I don't know. Like, do they think he's the? I don't know if they think he's the guy.
I mean,
in that building,
I would probably scare them when I said, I'll give you next year's number one as well, but you give me your number two to offset it. So I'll give you my one this year, and I'll give you my one next year, but I want your two. So I would look at those like we've been talking about to call back to all that we've been talking about. The Titans' second-round pick and my first-round pick are really meaningless. It's like trading nothing for nothing. It's the same thing, but not to the NFL. They think first-round draft picks are the greatest things ever. I'd rather have a second-round pick. So if I could get them to just go for my first-round pick this year, and then I'll give them my first next year, but you give me your second. So it's basically nothing. All I'm doing is giving you my first round from this year for Levis. I don't know what their reaction would be, but I know I would do it in 2 seconds.
It's wild. Yeah, I don't know that. Well, I doubt that happens in the NFL season, but who knows? Crazier things have happened, RC.
No GM has that guts, nor do they have. None of them have any conviction on Will Levis. They're still they'd rather have Bryce Young today than Will Levis.
32, we saw that.
32 out of 32 GMs. Well, maybe the only GM who wouldn't want to do this again is Carolina's GM. Yeah. But 31 out of 32 GMs, if offered Will Levis or Bryce Young, would take Bryce Young. I would say the over-under is 30.
It's, we talk about Carolina having a bad offensive line, but Tennessee, you can argue, is
the worst offensive line last year by far.
I mean, the hits that Levis was taking, RC, I'm thinking about that Houston game that knocked him out. Like, he was getting crushed, man. So
what he did behind that offensive line in some of those games that they won was unbelievable. What he did against Miami, who was starting to get smoking hot because Jalen Ramsey had come back. They had Ramsey and Howard, and the defense was starting to – there was a stretch. You would remember it from fantasy football. There was a stretch, and we called it out a month ahead of time, sitting on Miami, waiting for Jalen Ramsey to connect in there. And as soon as he did, Miami was the top defense in fantasy football for several stretches. And then all of a sudden they were squashed and they scored more points against Tennessee because there was a fumble return touchdown, a pick six, I think, touchdown against Levis. Everything was going poorly for Tennessee because of the offensive line. And then all of a sudden, with 9 minutes left in the game, Will Levis literally against what was starting to become one of the top defenses in the NFL with his offensive line that was like the Buffalo Bills having guys carted off in game. They were running out of offensive linemen by the time they were hitting Miami, and they were getting embarrassed. And then all of a sudden in the final 9 minutes, Will Levis led them back to a last-second victory.
It's wild to think that like Levis has that on tape and how bad Bryce Young played, but everybody would still take Young, except maybe the Carolina.
Everybody in the industry, the fans are one thing to be dumb. That's fine. But within their own industry, they would still make the same mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going back to like even like seeing some redraft articles, RC, when they're going back and they're redoing the 2023 NFL draft, and you're seeing, you can Google them and find a bunch of analysts, bunch of big time media outlets that have this, and they have Bryce Young within the top 15 picks last year. Like, how is this guy, like, first of all, how's he ahead of Levis? How's he a first round pick? Like, I don't think that if we redid the draft today, like, he'd be hard pressed even going in the second round. He's probably like third or below, right? He's a day 3 pick.
You can title this show "The NFL Draft is not a science; it is purely emotional."
I like it. We'll finesse the title a little bit, but we'll stick to that theme.
Right? That's a working version.
Yeah, there we go. But that's all we had today. Check out RC's site, ffmetrics.com. RC, any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience, or are we good to go?
Coming up, things that I am working on. Thankfully, I can work back in my bat cave that's set up to fight crime better than being on the road. But working on getting ready for free agency, and then when free agency hits, we'll be interpreting all of it for fantasy, for betting, for every which way. Also updating our dynasty top 600 when all these free agent impacts are, they're gonna. Kirk Cousins goes to Atlanta, man, it changes a lot. There is a lot of pinball action that reaches from Minnesota on down to Atlanta. And then all the subsequent defensive ramifications and kicker and all. So all of these moves are going to move the fantasy football market. So we'll be updating those. Our best ball top 600 will be debuting very soon, going through scouting reports of the NFL draft players, going through and re-scouting, regrading some of the ones that had combines that were vastly different than what we expected. We're going to do my first rewind report. Rewind for us being going back through and watching every play from the prior season of a particular player to try to get a feel for, the hidden value, what's an opportunity like we did with Rachaad White last year, or what's a fear like we did with Courtland Sutton a couple years ago, or Kyler Murray. My first rewind that I'm getting to as soon as free agency is over is going to be on going through every single play of Will Levis's 2023 to just kind of recapture and put into words a third viewing for me, live and then on tape last year, and then now with months away from it, just kind of re-looking back in and going, how good was this? Or was I too emotional last year about it? Or, did I miss it? What did I miss? What did I maybe oversee? We'll be working on rewinds all through the off season. So just so much football coming. So glad to be back in my home office to work on it all.
RC, we had a little dead period after the Super Bowl, but things are going to start ramping up with free agency and the draft right around the corner. So thank you, everybody, for listening today. Again, check out RC's site, ffmetrics.com, to get all of the content we were just talking about. Also, please subscribe to the FF Metrics YouTube channel. Leave a comment, drop a like, hit that notify button too, so you know exactly when this podcast drops and all future ones too. Until next time, hope everybody gets ready for free agency and gets pumped up for the upcoming stuff with around the league.
And we'll be doing a show to complain about it all as soon as it happens.
That's right. Right after free agency, we'll be here with our other show to get RC's reactions to everything that goes on. So until then, everybody, have a good one.